wait 30 seconds? Okay. Session items. One, the P to the fourth power Littleton Senior Living. And secondly, an update downtown design standards and guidelines discussion. So, first off is, we don't need a roll call, we know who's not here. First up is ID number 18-160, preliminary project plan process for Littleton Senior Living, located at 1151 West Mineral Avenue, Littleton, Colorado. Before we start, if you to refresh everybody's memory and those watching us on television, preliminary project plan process is very informal, non-binding feedback from the Planning Commission on a development concept without the developer spending a ton of money at this stage. Basically, roll up the flag and see what happens. So feel free to give your opinion, and you're not bound by your opinion if this ever comes before us in an official public hearing. Presentation will be by planning staff, owner's reps, or looks like they might be here. They're not allowed to speak, but they can of course sit in. If you looked at your material, the owner has opted to, of course, go before us, the Planning Commission, as well before the City Council. And lastly, as staff presents, feel free to ask questions as we go along rather than wait for the entire presentation. I think that'll make the proceedings go a little bit quicker. So, Jocelyn, you're presenting?
Yes, thank you, Chair and Planning Commissioners. As you mentioned, yes, this is Elko Properties, and they have submitted this P4 application for a development concept entitled Littleton Senior Living, which would be located at 1151 West Mineral Avenue, and the property is located within the Southbridge Plant Development. The Littleton Senior Living P4 is a residential use concept for this property. The property is approximately 6.6 acres in size, and it is located in Area K of Southbridge PD. Area K is zoned currently for office park uses. And the PD established uses for the various areas within Southbridge, and the 1983 ordinance adopted the tentative PUD plan, and that's the Southbridge PD, and that document was attached in your packet. The Elko Properties concept is for a 99-unit apartment and 22 single-story cottages. So that's 121 residential units, which would be rented to persons age 55 and older. And just briefly, as stated in their concept meeting request, for over 25 years, Elko Properties has developed and operated senior living communities, including age-restricted, independent, assisted, and memory care. Elko has the capacity and expertise to deliver a high-quality product and will complement the existing adjacent and proposed uses along Mineral Avenue corridor and become a valuable asset for the neighborhood and the city. Generally, a quick overview of the existing PD plan for 1151 West Mineral Avenue. The Southbridge PD tentative plan establishes uses for this property. As we said, the use is an commercial office park. There is no maximum density associated with the current PD. Maximum height is 30 feet when it's adjacent to within 150 feet of residential property, which is the case in this instance. There is residential property to the north. Open space is required 20%. There's some setback requirements as well as a 50-foot landscape buffer along the northern boundary. And parking must adhere to the city's parking requirement. The concept is considered a multifamily residential use per Littleton zoning code. And any change to allow residential use, there's one typo in here, would be done through an amendment to this PDC. Yes?
Is it all right if I ask a question?
Sure.
I thought I read in here that there was an update to the PD that allowed independent and memory care. Was that in that zone K or whatever was
For
called.
a different area, yes, but the proposal
for-
here is not for either of those uses, it's just for a
This is
multi-plan.
for age restricted, right?
Right, but basically for our code, that means it's multi-family residential.
Yeah, but was that, did I read that correctly, or was
You
that?
did, yes. When it was through the Project Stone Creek, I think that was the proprietor on a different parcel within Area K. They brought forward an amendment to the PD to allow assisted living and memory care on that property.
Yeah, that's the one on the corner there to the.
Enroll in,
Yeah, I think.
Or northwest is behind
Was that
the,
last year that they brought?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that was on June 12th last year.
Yeah.
We approved that, did council?
yes.
Okay.
Isn't that also a commercial piece? I don't believe that was considered residential. Because I remember that question came up during the meeting, that that was still commercial. Because
Yes,
it's
well,
not
this is
actually-
too, this would still be an amendment. PDC would still stay in place, it's just amending that to allow a residential use of multifamily apartments.
Yes, but I thought when we were looking at that, the specific question wasn't that that area was commercial, that under our code, that was still considered a commercial piece.
You know what, I'm gonna have to take that offline because that's the other project and we can certainly review all those details. It was an amendment to this Area K in Southbridge PD. And as is this concept, to amend that same area to allow for residential use.
will this be rental or for sale? The single, looks like the attached.
My
homes?
understanding is the concept is rental.
All rental, okay.
As you know, in our zoning code, we don't differentiate.
Right.
The proposed change would be to add the use of multifamily on this property. That's the proposed change. And then I did list in the staff communication, if you want me to just go through that, like what they're proposing, so what they would have to do to bring an amendment forward, or are you good? Do you want me to read that?
Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So the proposal quickly, density, they're proposing a density of 18.4 units an acre, proposes the height of 30 feet as currently is listed in the PD. Open space, it proposes 77%, but we just staff wanted to make a note that this calculation may include the parking areas, which per our code would not be allowed. But in the code, they would have to have a minimum of 20% open space. That would be the requirement.
You guys didn't update that, make the calculation there.
Sorry?
You didn't make the calculation
I did not.
between Thursday and
No.
Saturday? Okay. Just
So,
curious.
yeah, the application comes in, then we don't really, I'm not doing a review on it because it's a
Right.
concept. So we bring it forward and then we just make those notes if it looks like perhaps their calculation isn't particularly accurate. And then the last setbacks, they propose same as the existing PD. And then multifamily parking does require to be parked at 1.5 spaces per residential unit. That is our code. So that would be the requirement. Our code, as you guys know, does not allow any deviation from parking requirements. So they would have to provide that amount of parking for this use if they bring an amendment forward. So just
Let's talk about the parking then for a minute.
Yeah, sure.
They're proposing, it sounds like 137 spaces. You were saying they require 182.
That's correct.
So their ratio is 1.15, and I guess we're 1.5. So at any rate, that needs to be resolved, correct?
They would have to meet the 1.5 parking spaces per unit to bring forward an amendment.
Okay, and they have no choice in the matter.
That is correct.
They will have the,
They would have to do that.
okay.
Another question on parking, just because we're seeing some issues with parking in some other communities with these kind of ratios, is there the option, since this is an amendment, of actually increasing that to make sure that this doesn't become a parking problem like we're seeing otherwhere?
Yeah, so our code, you just can't go below what we require, but certainly
Yeah.
more than, the minimum standard.
I'm just
So-
concerned that even when you do the 1.5, because they're talking some 3 bedrooms in here also, and 2 bedrooms, and that doesn't seem like there'd necessarily be enough parking.
So, yes, good comment. So with that, I am finished. Is there more questions?
Just going back to the age.
Input you want?
Sure.
Yeah.
Just going back to the age restriction, is that going to be a deed restriction, do you know, or is that just a suggestion that could change later?
So the age restriction, again, in our code, we don't manage it based on that. That would
That's
just
what I'm
be
asking.
how the proprietor of the project would manage the property.
So that sort of question is left for if they bring an amendment.
The use based on Littleton's code would be as a multifamily residential use.
So, yeah, so as it stands here, it's just a suggestion, a restriction.
I believe that's their concept and that's their business model,
Understand
so
that.
that's what they're planning to do.
It could change.
Sure, anything could change, yeah.
No, I mean, if they built this and they put it all over 55 people, then somebody else buys it, they can just change it to any age.
Free market,
Free, yeah.
market, just market rate apartments.
Well, it's gonna be market rate anyway. In fact, age restriction is gonna bump it up above market. But
Correct.
presumably there'll be some more amenities that will be available in a regular apartment complex, but, you know, a common way, because most zoning is like that, where the restriction is not a real, it's not a code restriction according to the city, it's just the concept. So you can put a deed restriction on to limit that going forward into the future, or it's just a suggestion, and then in the future, it can just go to anyone. So, that's just my question. Thanks.
Well, don't be shy here. Speak up on technical questions as well as opinions. I'm sure the developer and their architect would value feedback at this stage. So when they refine if they continue to refine their proposal, they'll have an inkling as to what we prefer in the city. So go ahead, just fire away.
In the citywide plan, this area is shown as, under generalized current zoning on the map, is multifamily residential, even though it's zoned as PDC. Was there a thought that this is an appropriate use in that area when that was
But
developed?
we don't have a future land use map in our current comprehensive plan, so there are some multifamily apartments in that general area. I'm not sure what you're referencing, because the
It's
comp plan
called
doesn't necessarily,
Figure G in the 2014 comprehensive plan, the vision plan that was developed by this group a couple of years ago. I don't know if that, I mean, it's a generalized future, or current zoning, it's called. And it shows everything west of that cul-de-sac. There in the middle, I'm not sure we can read the name of the street. It's multifamily residential. Cul-de-sac there, which is east of the side.
While you're, okay.
That was my only question.
The neighborhood hasn't reviewed this yet, or we don't know whether they've been notified, or like,
Which the neighborhood
yeah, so
association. They're not
process-wise.
notified.
it won't be.
Yeah, remember, process-wise, pre-application meeting is first step, so that staff can figure out what you're doing relative to what the process would be, for your application. Then P4 is an option for anyone that wants to amend a PD or create a new one or a rezoning. So they selected this option. And then the next step, we do require that applicants hold a neighborhood outreach meeting before they submit a formal application. Yes, we have had citizen inquiries about this particular use on this property.
So, looking at this concept site plan, with a three-story building, at least from what I can figure on here, that is not 150 feet away from the lot line going to the residence. It looks closer to maybe a little over 100. So, for me, then, you have to have that at 150 feet before you go to 3 stories, according to our code. And that, the concept does not show that.
I thought it was
It's 30 feet, right?
No, it's 150 feet to go to a 3-story.
No, 30 feet.
No, it's 150.
30 feet's high.
30, yeah.
30 feet high,
30
yeah.
feet,
Mhm.
yeah.
So it says
It
three
doesn't say
story.
3 stories, right?
Yes, it does. It says 3 stories, right? Oh, it says when you go to 3 stories, then you need to have the 150 feet from the
Maximum
lawn.
height is 30 feet. With a maximum,
It's not 150 feet from
I
the
understand,
lawn.
but
It says
this
within
doesn't say 3
150.
stories, it just says 30 feet. I'm just saying, 3 stories doesn't really enter into it, it's 30 feet. That's right. So I
Right.
looked at one of the single stories, and that's over 30 feet too, it looked like at the height of
I'm
the...
not talking about the feet. I'm talking about where it says you have to be 150 feet away from a residential
Right,
area.
if you go 30 feet or higher.
And that's 30 feet. It says here 3 stories on the blue. So I'm going by what this says. It says it's
Just
3
going by
stories.
what this says here.
This is our concept plan, and they show a 3-story apartment building, and it looks to be less than 150, because they got a 50 mark,
Right, I understand
and then
that.
the parking
You're right,
area.
it is less than 150 feet, and it's over 30 feet, so...
And it's just, we need to have the 150 feet away from the residential, like, from what it was saying in our packet.
Yeah.
So that was
Go
my
above
concern.
30 feet.
Right, right, if they went lower than 30 feet and then waited till they hit the 150, but just the way the concept looks, it doesn't show that. That was
No,
my
you're right.
comment.
I agree with that.
And the other thing that I was looking at is, considering there's the residential behind it, it almost seems like it would be an easier transition between the residential to the multifamily home to actually have the single-story cottages, just to break it a little farther away from being near the multifamily homes.
I agree with you, Rob, and I think if you could get those one-story buildings closer, I mean, have that, sort of that scale go from that existing single family to the north, and kind of work its way up towards the south, towards Mineral, where the bigger buildings are anyway. That may also solve that 150-foot setback problem. If the blue building actually were to kind of ooze its way more to the south, rather kind of lose that wing on the north side and move more towards the south, running more east-west, that may sort of scaling-wise, it just seems better.
For Stone Creek, that was one of the residents' main concerns, was the scaling from their residences to the south. And I think the developer did accommodate that and kind of stepped that building up. So it was lower as it was closer to those existing residences. And then the green space was a buffer without a parking area between the building and the green space, and I think that helped the residences too. With this plan, with the green space being narrower and the parking squeezed in between the building and the green space and the residences, I think that might be something that a few residents might have an issue with.
I've heard from a few residences who are very concerned about this, and along the lines of what we're talking about.
Nelson, maybe we're the only two confused here. It says 30 foot is the maximum height when within 150 foot of residential zone property. The setback is 50 feet. And the height limit is 30 feet. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
So it
The
doesn't have to
setback
be.
on the north.
Doesn't have to be 150 feet away.
Only if it goes over 30 feet.
No, it's within 150 feet, not at 150 feet.
Right.
The maximum heights of structures, this is what the code says.
It's
The
within
maximum height of
150 feet.
structures-
Just a second, guys. Go ahead.
The maximum, this is what the code reference in here, this is what it says. The maximum height of structures located within 150 feet of any residential property boundaries shall not exceed 30 feet.
So that doesn't mean the setback has to be 150.
Correct.
No.
Okay,
Just the
okay.
building, but the building is over 30 feet,
Has to be more than 100.
and it's less than 150 feet away from the boundaries, so
it has to be 30
it
feet.
has to be lower.
That'd be fine. Yeah, that part is,
All right.
I agree with.
Quickly, so going back to Craig's question, just to clarify, thank you, Dennis, for going to get our comprehensive plan. So here's, we have 2 maps. There is a map F and map G. They are both generalized current land, well, one's generalized current land use and one's generalized current zoning. So generalized current land use shows this area in the business or industrial. Generalized current zoning appears to show this entire office park as multifamily, and I think it's just a mistake, and then they should have been more like on the gray industrial color.
It actually looks like it's the western half of the industrial portion.
Yes, all the way from there to Windermere.
Right.
Is what it shows on this map. So staff was estimating that this is just a mistake.
Mistake in color.
Yeah, because the current
Color
zoning,
grading or something,
this is
yeah.
showing current zoning, and current zoning is office park. So, anyway, to clarify that.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Other comments?
Could you also, Jocelyn, clarify again the height, how you measure the height on a gable roof?
Top?
Yeah,
Ridge or?
it's to the top, right?
Absolute top.
Mechanical equipment can go into that a little bit, or how does that work?
That can, depend, well, we actually had a legal interpretation about this, and so mechanical equipment cannot be visible from any adjacent property, so it has to be screened. It can be higher than the maximum height. Generally, when it's on a building like a multifamily thing, it's usually set back far enough so that you don't necessarily see it from adjacent properties.
I thought, the way I read it, that the apartment buildings were proposed to be no more than 30 feet high. Did I miss something that it's actually
I'm
proposed?
just looking at this, these measurements here. There's not a lot of detail here, though, so. And it looks like they're measuring existing buildings, so I'm not sure if they're using this as a reference. So yeah, the buildings would just have to be 30 feet or less if they're within.
Ask you a question. We were tangled up in the setback. Can you explain again, you were proposing, thought it was a good idea to put some of the little row houses.
Yeah, the
what,
single-story
towards the north?
cottages maybe to the north is sort of having a small scale on the north side relating to the residences to the north, and then stepping up toward to the south.
Okay.
Which it seems like the height of the office buildings are relating more to that as it goes to the south.
I agree. I think that transition, you'd meet a lot less opposition from that neighborhood if there was some sort of a transition from the higher density to the lower density and the scale.
But keeping in mind, if it was if they were doing a commercial office building, they would just follow the setbacks and build 3 stories, or 30 feet,
Yep.
and not go before us or council. They just go straight to zoning and building. So, yeah, but this was a negotiated, our suggestion type of meeting here.
I think if they move those single stories to the north, though, they lose the U shape. You'd have to have just a straight across.
Well, it can be
'Cause it's-
C-shaped, or it would be U-shaped. You just rotate this whole thing around and just make it, I'd have to draw it, but
But they're pretty close to the,
Is that what an architect does in his office?
they're about 100-foot set back from the boundary. If they moved it any closer, they'd have to, or further away, they'd be less than 50 feet away, you know what I mean? So this green belt is about 50 feet
yeah, no, I
wide.
think that can stay. I think they can still get the same amount. I think they have like a 35,000 square foot footprint or something like that. They can basically get that to work on there. It's just, it would be a suggestion if it comes back and says, no, it just doesn't work, but
This is all
that'd
suggested.
be a friendly neighbor if you have the lower scale stuff towards the north.
Speak up.
Yeah, I actually, knowing that, I've been by that site a lot because the fire admin offices are in the building right to the west of it. And the way they've got this laid out with what is there, the residential neighborhood to the north, to me, is, it exists, it certainly is there, but it strikes me as being really partitioned. I mean, it's very, you don't really get a good sense that the neighbors are there. I tend to agree with what you guys are saying, that if there's ways to buffer it, more is more instead of less is more. But the design that they had in here didn't strike me as being unreasonable given the nature of it. 30 foot on the 3-bedroom, or I'm sorry, 30-foot on the apartment side of it looked good. I thought there was a lot of good open space in it. I thought the concept fits real well in there. I agree with, I was gonna say what you said, which is, you know, if they were gonna put office in there, it could just be, you know, pretty monolithic, which is not good. But that area, even though there is some commercial in there, does not strike me when you go by it as being too particularly oppressive with density. It does feel open, and I think they seem to have captured that in terms of what they've got cooking here. The density, to me, worked, but I would have no problem going with what you said in terms of reorienting the thing, as long as you don't have to take the U and unwind it so it's a big straight line, which just looks like a big wall. I don't think office is useful in there. As long, this isn't memory care. I think we absolutely have a need for the patio home kind of thing per the comp plan, per the market. I think it'll be lower impact for the neighbors and less active than a commercial use or an office use would be. I was going to go back to the parking because, yes, absolutely have to agree with, you know, code. But I'm guessing that the nature of what they're trying to do here means you could get a lot of these units with maybe a single vehicle as opposed to one, you know, 2 vehicles. I mean, if you got people who are, you know, over 60, maybe older yet again, I don't know how we would deal with any sort of variance in there. Me personally, I would rather see more units because there's a need for housing, and parking is what it is, that's fine. I don't get the sense that the thing is underparked the way they proposed it, but I don't know what latitude we have in that regard, and I also don't know.
Fortunately, in your land use code, you do not latitude on that one particular topic.
Yeah, so there's nothing they can do about that?
Unless and until we change the parking code requirements.
Okay. And I'm assuming you're
It's
not,
more a function of our land use code, and so
Yeah.
you have to meet parking. I'm sure based on, if this is their forte, that they probably,
They'll figure
in
it.
the industry, that is probably fair representation, what they think they're gonna need.
well,
But we have to follow our.
yeah, I think what's there is a fair representation in their designs. I think the problem is if I'm guessing our parking code isn't as dynamic maybe as it could be with this type of product, perhaps, not, I'm just throwing that out
Well,
there.
Say it's
the argument against what you just said is,
Visitors.
Visitors, exactly. You know, you have a Super Bowl party, you have a Thanksgiving or Easter, where do people park? The residents are parking
Yeah.
in the general parking lot to the east. Where do all those people park?
I was gonna suggest that there's these big office parking areas
Right next to it. Yeah, no, exactly. Just
And
get it
developer
over.
could strike a deal with one of those to
Yeah.
provide.
I don't know if our code allows striking a deal, probably
Why
not.
not?
I'm sorry, what's that, Jocelyn?
Yeah, but I mean, we'd have to just work on if it meets the parking requirements. That's the main point.
And I assume they haven't done, there's no intention, it's not in here, to do any sort of underground parking, which would better utilize the land, because obviously you know, the cost component goes up dramatically, but
Certainly, someone could do that.
yeah, hypothetically. So that's just, I guess, an observation.
Going to the parking though, just because someone is 60, I've never seen someone who's turned 60 and says, oop, I want to get rid of my car.
I'm not saying everyone will, but I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
maybe some of us are a little closer to 60 than.
A little over.
I understand.
Youngsters.
People usually don't give, I mean, we've even heard people say when they go into some of the homes where they have the services, they still don't want to give up their car. Car is very personal, so I think you have to be very careful with thinking that you can get away with less parking when we're seeing the problems we're seeing in other parking complexes, that there's just not enough parking in those areas, and they're parking into the streets and they're parking into other neighborhoods.
I think I absolutely am not an expert. I understand your point. I don't disagree with it per se. Given that in some of the product oriented more towards seniors, I think this issue may come up more. I remember it was a topic of conversation in some of the other apartments that had some of these attributes. I'm guessing there's an industry standard for what's, a large population or a law of large numbers says if there's a lot of these things nationwide, there's probably statistics that say this is really what you're likely to need in this type of an area. I don't know what it is. I just more or less asking from the standpoint of if they got to do code and that's what it is what it is, then, I think that pretty much is what you're saying, that meet code and you're good to go kind of thing.
No, actually, I'm concerned there's not enough if you meet code. Because we're seeing our multifamily apartment complexes that meet code that are finding the cars thrown over. So I'm concerned more about that.
Okay, all right.
Do you separate, in the parking, do you separate out the single story from the apartment
Looks like they have
building?
garages. Looks like they have driveways.
Because it looks like on the single families, you could, or the duplexes, maybe they are, you can park one in the garage, one in the driveway, and then there's still room on the street. But I would still like to see 1.5 parking spaces per unit just for the, the 3-story apartment building itself. That's my opinion.
Just returning to the 55-plus marketing that they're doing, I've often seen municipalities use like a development agreement or even the PUD process itself to mandate certain age restrictions, and that I'd like to see the city consider that, some of those mechanisms as part of the approval process, because something that is 55-plus has sort of different characteristics than an apartment complex that's open to anyone. Particularly like with trip generation, the number of typical trips a household makes in a day is far lower for folks who are 55+, at least according to the traffic engineering handbooks. So that would make a big difference in terms of how this thing operates. I do like the 50-foot buffer they're proposing on the north that pretty much required is the setback. Like the idea of the aspirational trail, but it doesn't look like it connects to anything. At least the one they're showing on their site plan, which is in some ways just a missed opportunity for that whole office park to have this massive setback that doesn't look like it's utilized much other than Xeriscape.
One of those places to take the dogs is my first impression.
Well, it needs a place to start. There's a park to the west.
Yeah.
If they build a trail, maybe the office building would eventually build one, and maybe the assisted living would have one as well.
Yeah, it'd be a wonderful connection.
Even if it did, even if it dumped into the parking lot to the west, you could then walk to the sidewalk and get over to the High Line, and things are good to go.
Yeah, it's a neat idea. Tying it is a challenge. Yeah.
One other question. You got the roundabout here, sort of in the upper right corner, which I guess is the southeast side of the property. Is that then a road down to Mineral? Is that a curb cut into Mineral as an egress?
Yeah, if you look at the aerial, there's a...
It's existing. Is it existing? Yeah. That is West Mineral Place. I think it's existing. I think it's going to be put in. I think it's there. Because this is here? Okay. Is there a light there?
No, I don't think there's a light.
Is there, because it's close enough to the light at Windermere?
I honestly can't answer that. As
Okay.
far as why there isn't one.
Okay, I just didn't know if, when it gets to a threshold where that's an issue.
Certainly, as you know, should this move forward and actually eventually turn into, some version of a site development plan, then traffic analysts,
That's fine.
analysis and stuff,
Okay.
and even to some degree with the PD, require some analysis of that.
I have a question. The rehab hospital just to the east, does that fall within the planned development commercial zoning, or is that?
It's not within Southbridge PD, is that?
That's not within?
No, it's not. I don't think so, is it?
That whole area is.
Oh, they did. Oh, I'm sorry, maybe it's not in Area K? May.
Yeah, that's.
I don't know, I can't remember.
It's
I'm sorry, I
it's in
misspoke.
Southbridge, but
Yeah, okay,
I think that was a rezone, wasn't it? I thought they just
I don't know.
did ag by use.
I can't tell you that.
I'm not sure.
Right, it's on that same side of the street, sorry.
This was years ago.
I could not answer that. It's there.
it's there, that's existing.
I'll tell
It
you
must be
that.
legal.
But their access is down off of Lottie, it looks like, or it's, just wondering how that access between this proposed development and that rehab hospital would interact.
Yeah, I think this is their emergency entrance, and this is their front door.
So
I
they,
think this is
come right
exactly
in.
is there because you come in.
Right, you come in right there.
Yeah.
So they're gonna share that south, West Mineral Place access with the rehab hospital.
The properties that are along here do share that access, that's correct.
So, just for emergency situations, I was just wondering if that might raise some concerns with, emergency response.
All those fire, all emergency services do review these applications and provide input on what is needed.
So they'll make sure they have the adequate width and turn radius for the,
I could be wrong, but I don't think you have ambulances arriving at this rehab hospital. I've been there. And while you could have somebody hurt themselves and an ambulance would have to come in and take somebody to another hospital, this particular hospital
more
is,
like for recovery.
yeah, so you would just go there and not be taken by ambulance, I think, generally. But, so we haven't seen this before, right? This is a dumb question. Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, it's just very similar, I think, to that independent living, because it's got a curb cut with a court that they're going to extend with a driveway on that property as well, so it's.
Took a double take, when
Yeah.
I saw it first thought, yeah. Deja vu all over again.
But yeah, I was thinking, yeah, got it.
Well,
The same
I-
arguments were coming up for that.
We'll have some, just some mild concerns, and I'll also touch on the good. Parking ratios stuck out for me right away, and if there's no latitude, they'll have to conform. Be interesting, down the road to get to the neighborhood feedback. We have none so far, so we have no idea what neighbors to the north will say or neighbors to the northwest will say. That's upcoming attractions. I like the way, they're honoring the PD requirements for the setback sites, et cetera. That's good. I'd like to quote something they had in their application. Design will be distinctive with high-quality design. I know this is a preliminary application, and on purpose, you're not supposed to put a ton of time in with consultants, et cetera, but they've got a ways to go on quality design from what I've seen in the perspective views. It's probably very cookie cutter at this stage just to get something in front of us, but to meet that requirement of high quality design is they need to do some work. The attached patio homes, I think, is a wonderful thing. I think they'll sell out as soon as you sell, or rent out as soon as you build them. If you build more, you'll have more sales. Let's see, the fact that the assisted living was approved nearby, northwest corner of K, section K, I think is a good thing, and that sets a bit of precedence to allow what they want to do here. Those were my general thoughts looking this over. Anyone else?
Yeah, I had a couple more comments. I had heard from a few residents who live there, and they are very concerned with this. One of the comments, I know that some think the residential is better than commercial, but personally, for me, commercial is better than residential. You've got people who come in 9 to 5, they're gone. You've got a multi-story of people, lots of people. There's a lot more noise, a lot more activity. So it depends on your perspective, but I don't think it's an assumption to say that this is better than commercial. To me, I'd rather have the commercial behind me because it's gone. They're gone on weekends, they're gone evenings, and it's quiet. If you've ever lived in multifamily housing areas, there's a lot more noise, a lot more people. It's just,
That stuck out for me a little bit too, not enough to make a comment about, but,
Yeah.
it's debatable.
Yeah. I don't think we can assume that this is better on any other thing, because that's very personal. The other thing is, this is commercial, and I think we have to be really careful, because we're in a downside where people aren't building commercial as much, but that doesn't mean things won't change. And, as a city, we have to consider the fiscal responsibility of when you start putting things like this. It's more expensive for a city to have to, take care of this. So part of our comp plan is about the, things being economically sustainable. If we're taking away commercial, we are actually making it more expensive for the city. There's just, you have to weigh when you are playing around with something like this, that's going such a dramatic change to how it's been zoned. I had talked to a previous planning commissioner who was around a lot longer than I've been, and he was talking about in the 90s over at South Park. They were looking at the same thing, taking South Park and making it residential, but the city said, no, we're in a cycle, we're going to wait. And of course, we now see what happened to South Park, where it is thriving businesses there. So we have to not just look short term, we also have to look long term. Do we take away this? And I can't help but think as we're going through the visioning process now, looking at it, the potential for doing a new comp plan, do we really want to do something so dramatical when we could see with that kind of planning if this is the right type, or if we should keep that commercial instead of doing something hodgepodge with an area that's commercial. So I just bring that up as food for thought.
Good. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think kind of a similar thought in terms of life cycle of this type of product as well. Obviously, there's a huge demand for age-restricted, older people communities right now. A lot of them are being built. A lot of them have waiting lists and so on. But looking, 20, 30, 50 years when you and I are gone, is that going to become something else? Is it going to remain a sustainable thing? I guess I'd like to hear, as we review these things, more about the life cycle of a age-restricted community and how adaptable it is within people moving.
We can also say that with every commercial project. I've been talking to people, one in particular that knows his business. Life cycle of a shopping center is 20 to 30 years these days, or even less. And they go up great fanfare, and what used to stand around forever is gone, repurposed, what have you.
The other aspect is, having our economic development folks weigh in on basically what's essentially a change of use from a commercial to a residential in terms of, how it affects our tax base and so on. I think that should be a consideration.
Back in the 90s, the city managers, planners, council, they drew a line in the sand. No conversion of commercial into residential. And they were quite firm for a while. Maybe 15 years ago, it started to crumble, changing conditions, less need for retail. Office, there's not much built. What office is being built is in a lot more glamorous, bigger areas, concentrated areas than little hodgepodge pieces in Littleton. So it has changed a lot. And 30 years from now, it'll change again.
And I think the flexibility is a beautiful thing. And also, with respect to this particular location, there is, obviously an arbitrary line that was drawn there, a very straight line. And a residential use up against a residential use and maybe softening that hard edge makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, this seems to be a good location for this type of use in general.
A vacant commercial is going to generate somewhat less tax base than a completed, residential. So
Residential costs the city money versus the commercial, so that's all we were talking about. It actually costs the city money because you provide services to them. So that does have a tax base, but it actually costs the city more when you put homes or multifamilies on it than we actually cost more. Then it does for a commercial.
Shops, and if there's people there that are shopping.
Yeah, you need the dudes for the wallet. It's the
It
balancing.
doesn't cost incremental services, police and fire and sewer. and all
Yes, it
that.
does.
No,
Yes,
you're not
it
going
does.
to add police and fire to cover this area.
Actually, Tiffany had brought up when she was talking about just overall general, and she talked about how it costs more to do residential than it does
It
commercial.
would if you were annexing something, if you,
No,
if it
just
was
a
a
general
new.
building.
Well, I don't think they're gonna add staff to police and fire.
No, not made for one, but if we keep changing it, like, when we had Littleton Village and, that changed dramatically. We've watched, the city is hiring more staff, they're hiring more police officers. I mean, it's the culmination of things. So it's the incrementalism of it does affect us.
The other thing though, I mean, I think this, I was trying to go back and see where it was, but I mean, this K, where's the map that shows, or the list of what can go in K? It was the zoning,
Which one is it?
I can't remember.
Fifth Amendment.
Is that what it was?
Oh, this is the Southbridge PD tentative plan?
Oh, here it is. So K is basically, is office park, right? So I mean, it's technically commercial, but it's not retail. And from a sales tax standpoint, this thing wouldn't be on the street anyway. It's buried in back of another parcel. And the only thing that was ever gonna go in here was essentially commercial. So you're gonna get one of two things. Yeah, you might get incremental property tax at a real low rate from a commercial building, which you're gonna get from a residential building anyway. And you'd have office workers who would then go purchase things when they're here, like lunch, versus the folks that live there that are gonna, buy sales tax at, say, at the stores or the restaurants or so forth and so on. So I mean, to me, it's sort of a quid pro quo that one versus the other, given the nature of that particular parcel where it is, isn't a dramatic alteration. Just my opinion.
I think, just like we looked at that to improve that project behind Walgreens there on Bellevue, it was kind of buried back there commercially. It was a no-starter. That wasn't going to happen. It's now going to be, the three-story townhomes. This property, I think, has an advantage of being further back. I'd have a little more trouble with it if we were pushed right against Mineral, where you have more of a chance to have office space or, by God, maybe retail there, which I doubt, but maybe. This is buried in the back, kind of like in the northwest corner that we changed in Area K.
So on our zoning map, it shows a parcel that is kind of rectangular, and one of the earlier maps in this proposal was kind of rectangular. I was wondering if it was like half of that lot, or is it the full lot as shown on our zoning map?
Sorry, which zoning map? In your packets?
In the back.
It's the,
Yeah, it was kind of showing like half of this entire parcel.
Is that? I think it's this.
I think that's what I thought, yeah. I thought it was the whole thing.
Yeah.
Looking at this.
Yeah,
Because it has to be because there's a two-story office building.
there's the street.
Right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the whole, I don't know what that black line is. I don't know what you've got there.
Yeah, I was just looking at an earlier rendition in the materials that were provided. So it should be that entire parcel.
Okay.
6 acres.
Okay. Any other, these are good comments, and some of the, like your points, have been thought about quite a bit, and they'll be debated before, they'll be debated again. It's ongoing discussion. There's nothing else. Hopefully we've given a little bit of feedback and opinions, and good luck to you at City Council. Done? Okay, move on. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. We're now on the second item, which is ID number 18-182, presentation of the final draft of the updated downtown design standards and guidelines. Little background. We started the process, maybe 6 months ago, something along those lines. A tech committee was formed. I ended up joining it with John and some downtown property owners, business people, and Bill Hopping was former historic preservation and council member. He joined this group. So I think we're up to, what, 5 meetings, and I think we're meeting one more time. We were promised 4, we're now up to 6, so we get OT pay.
How much is that?
Zero. Any rate, so we've been slogging through, 5 meetings, going over rough drafts, talking concept. I think the overriding deal here was we had this 182-page design guidelines and standards, a lot more guidelines than standards, and they were being somewhat ignored by sometimes a lot ignored by developers that just work their way around them, architects as well. The goal was to firm up the guidelines into standards, not to overreach. There's still property rights. The existing underlying zoning remains. The B2, R5, and the CA district remain. So there are rights there. We also didn't want to go too far into making or setting new policy. That's not to be decided by a tech committee and a consultant and one staff member, 2 staff members, but is to be decided by, down the road, council, planning commission, citizens. So that was our charge, is to tiptoe into changing a lot of the guidelines into standards. And this is what you see as a result. So, take it away.
Where we are in the process, April 23rd, we had a joint meeting with Planning Commission. We went back, and the consultants went back and made changes based on the notes we got there. We also posted the plan and asked questions in terms of what do you think about this? Are you comfortable with the sessions? And we got really good comments back. We also got some individual letters and so we incorporated those changes into the current draft, and the draft that we have now is we've got a date on it that we're going forward with. We then had an open house on May 24th. So that's the date of the draft that's current. Following that draft, we're going through an additional review process. We will not be changing the draft again until we get after full adoption. It's too cumbersome to start changing once you have the photos in it and everything else. So we will just be keeping a list of comments and changes we want to be making and taking that forward. So we've got study session tonight. We want to hear your comments, initial thoughts in terms of changes that have been made and what you're feeling about it. And then on June 5th, we go to a study session with City Council. So this is all in preparation for the adoption process itself. On June 18th, the Historical Preservation Board will have a public hearing. They will make a recommendation to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has the authority per City Council, or City Code, to actually adopt design guidelines for the city, so for historic districts and for just the city in general. So they will look at adoption. And then on July 9th, they will then have that hearing with the recommendation from HPB. They will then consider adoption, and then that will go on with an additional step this time, and that is July 17th. We're going to City Council, asking them for ratification of the plan. So it's a new step. We're just thinking we really are looking for them to be involved in the process and have ownership and buy-in, and make sure that they approve of these as well. So have an additional stamp of approval as we go forward. And so we think we're on time with this. The consultants have been working very hard to get things ready to go, and we would love to hear your comments. And we will also be getting additional comments as we go through this from the other boards at the public hearings.
Did I hear you right? This is not a draft. This is final. You're not going to make any other changes to
Until
this
after
document?
adoption. Yeah,
So, well, if Planning Commission have comments tonight and we need to make changes,
We can
well,
do
then
it.
of course we'll incorporate those. And it goes to council next week, so if there's additional tweaks and edits we need to work on, of course we'll do that.
Well, there's mundane things like, I could count probably 50 comments that don't belong. They're misused, they're overused. That's mundane. There's spelling errors in here that we just, it's not allowable. You can go in and make those changes before this goes to council.
Yes, it is a
Or-
draft. It's
Historic Preservation Board.
what we're presenting to you is the final draft based on all of what Dennis has said as outreach to this point, including community input and comments. But yes, it's still a study session, so yes, we'll still take your input, and next week, yes, we'll still take city council input.
Sounds like
Then
you're-
after that, then we move forward more towards formal adoption and a final plan.
Sounds like what you're trying to avoid is heavy-duty new concepts here. Okay.
Right.
Okay, now we're beyond that. All right.
Yep.
At some point, we have to get beyond that.
Right.
Okay. How do you want to do this? Well, I'm thinking we could go section by section like we did with the Bellevue plan. And rather than make all your comments on everything, go section by section.
I just have one general process question. I think I heard that this was the first of what might be several phases of developing this document, that we're really intending to identify the existing conditions here, and then there may be a next phase that identifies future proposed conditions.
Right.
Yeah.
Based on the fact that we're really looking at things which were not policy related, we also came up in the discussions with the task force and with staff and with the consultants, things that really are policy related. So we've made a list of those things and say, okay, well, maybe we do a second phase, we actually start dealing with those questions as well. So at this point, we're really just trying to use the intent and the content that we have, convert what we can to standards. But there were a lot of questions that came up in terms of.
So is there a parking lot where those questions are?
Yes. Yeah. there is, yeah. So-
Based on city council's direction, was pretty specific on these three things, right? Clean it up, make it readable, add more pictures that are more relevant, and turn the guidelines into standards. So we tried to stay within that, but several topics came up that are important. We didn't want to lose them, so it's like a next phase parking lot of those ideas that have come out from both community comments, the task force, staff review, you guys, input, everything, so yeah.
I think with most Littleton documents like our old comprehensive plan, like 40 years old, hopefully this document can be updated every few years. As downtown is changing, so what are the issues that none of us can even think about right now that will happen in 3 or 4 or 5 years? So this document has to be revised and updated occasionally versus every 40 years. Any other just general comments before we get into this? Yeah.
For the overview, introduction, wasn't there going to be kind of like a historical character paragraph or something?
Yes, there was.
What happened to that?
We have, that's not in here yet, you're right. And we also were looking at the ones that the committee has put together too. So we're looking at adding both those as well, the ones with.
Okay.
Yeah, so additional photos, a little history.
So the sidebars aren't complete because it's just looking kind of vacant over
Absolutely,
there.
right.
So in a way, this is kind of a preliminary draft because there's still some fairly significant content that's not in here.
Right, we're looking at that one history piece, right, a little background in terms of where we are, and then the side pieces that Mark and Bill worked on.
So, or drop the ball. Yeah.
We probably should make a note of that, Dennis,
Yes,
so
yeah.
they actually get in here.
Yes,
That's what
exactly.
Okay, well, I guess I'm a little uncomfortable with this, some of those things dangling and not in a final form here.
I think that's about it, though. I mean, there may be other things we find as we go through, but those were introductory pieces.
Yeah.
I think when we get into the standards themselves,
We're
pretty much on board.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
I think we should table.
Are you hungry?
what's on?
Like the parking ratio is overruled, it's we have to get through it tonight. Okay, Dennis, take it through section by section.
Okay.
Are we still on the overview, or are we going to,
Sure.
I just wanted to confirm something. On the sidebar where it talks about learn more about whatever it is, Title 10 or what. Here, : is this going to be like a link there? Right now, that doesn't show us anything like where
Yes.
that would go, so I'm
Yes,
just
there will
assuming
be,
read
there
the
will
link.
be live links for all of these as well.
Thank you.
So, yeah, it's electronic.
For the online, for the electronic.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
You mean I won't be able to tap on this?
Not yet.
No, we'll be able to have it, unfortunately.
Maybe in the future we'll
You
have
can see
that.
it.
A hologram.
Need some QR codes.
Anything else on, let's talk on the overview section. So anything else on overview? Purpose of the standards, scope and applicability, terms related to compliance.
Well, that was really, I have really good here. That was lovely, explaining explicitly what shall, should, and may be
Oh, good.
are. So I like that a lot.
Good.
That's incredibly helpful for someone reading the plan and to
Yeah.
understand that should doesn't mean, I don't really have to do that. No, it means there has to be a really good reason not to.
Let's go on to the sub areas, which is the description.
Can I- Sure, one question on that, you've got the term should is used in parens or in quotes there, shouldn't it just be should is quoted as opposed to is used?
Okay, sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I assume we all have little spelling errors we spotted, commas, this type of thing.
Right.
Yeah, we don't have to,
Yeah, if you can send those to us electronically or hard copy, that's great.
Don't
And
do
we'll
that.
keep reading
Except
through
for
as well.
Bruce, he can chime in with.
No, I'm just kidding. I think we've established a baseline.
The other thing I think we should do in this section, because I think it's really hard to know that we have a lot of these terms defined. There's a glossary in this document. I didn't know that until quite a while into, that not that I didn't know that. I eventually figured it out because I'm like, what do these mean? But I think if we can do something, terms related to compliance, and just mention that in the beginning about, look at the glossary, because we actually have a lot more definitions in here than you would think.
We've added more, I think, through the process too.
Yeah, right? So I
And-
think that might be a good reference piece to add as well.
Good.
Yeah.
And if you have other terms you'd like to have defined in the glossary,
Yeah.
you can let us know too. I
Yep,
think that's key to understanding.
exactly. Yep.
Do you, I don't know if this is necessary, but do you guys, in a legal document, once you define something in a glossary or define a term, they always capitalize that term? Do you guys do that in here?
We haven't, we thought about that.
Yeah.
Would that be helpful to everybody? To bold it and capitalize it? Yeah. so-
We offered that as a suggestion from staff, I believe, to the consultant.
Right.
Because I think it's just time, right?
Yeah.
Going through it, but something to let you know that a lot of these things are defined.
Yeah, no, you could just put it in the overview too, right below the shall or whatever.
Yeah, something.
Good.
Maybe consider.
Anything else on that first section? Ready to move on to sub areas?
So there's-
One of the recommendations that came out of the staff and also the technical team was design guidelines at this point only apply to the area south of Crestline. And we're thinking it'd be helpful to actually in phase 2 or some other phase, actually think about expanding this and extending this to the north. So we have some design reference for that as well, since it certainly feels like part of downtown. Might go up to Bellevue probably, that's kind of what the thought is, we might have some other dividing line, but that's something we could think about, so.
Is that for the revised,
Right.
2-3 years from now? Get it in there.
Yeah, it's another phase, I think, because it's going to take some discussion, we'll have to develop those design standards. We also, the final map will actually, the online map actually clarifies its boundaries quite a bit for us too, so which is nice. Colors work?
Color's good.
Okay. Anybody colorblind?
I like the colors, but it kind of like what you were saying, though, it's really hard to distinguish some of the boundaries here. So if someone is just not having access to a computer, trying to figure out some of the boundaries will be a little harder on the eyes. If you have a laptop, like you're saying, fine, but for someone who's not accessing it at the moment, that could be a little hard to see. But
Absolutely,
other
and
than
I
that,
think we need to have a graphic that actually really delineates those boundaries.
Yeah.
It's always been a problem for all of us, I think, for developers, property owners, and staff, just where is that boundary? And so you really need to get that set, because it makes a fairly significant difference.
Well, and then
Some of the
also,
darker colors.
I think the other piece is that if you'll notice, some of we have properties that are in 2 different sub-areas. So I think that might be another thing to contemplate.
draw it on the property lines.
Yeah.
Okay. I really appreciate the street names. It's a big improvement over them.
Oh, good. Okay.
So minor graphic-y thing.
Okay.
North arrow, and then also, is there a way to actually delineate the tracks?
Yeah, sure it is.
And/or Little's Creek, which is referenced a number of times in the plan.
To show the tracks, is that what you
Yeah,
want?
the tracks,
Yeah.
North arrow, then.
Just for reference, one of the mandates for the Design Standards Committee was to just update the existing plan and convert the guidelines to standards. And that was pretty much the mandate of the committee. So that's part of why it looks like it does, and it's very similar to the original document in that respect. It's just much more consolidated.
Well, anything to improve, like this map a little bit like the North Arrow, but also maybe call out the, courthouse, just spell it out. Show the tracks, that makes sense. How about the boogeyman, the Grove, show that. Just kidding.
Good.
Okay, any other comments about the general map?
On the map?
None? Okay.
How about sub-area 1? Or sub-area 2, those 2 pages?
I found them all pretty, well, because you and I, John, we looked over this so many times, I think they're pretty matter of fact and well done.
And we did deal with the existing character and try to define it more clearly. We have not dealt with desired character. Taking that really is more of a policy question. So we have to take it, update the plan or revisions to this. There's definitely more discussion in terms of what that is. So those are exactly like they were in the original.
I'll just throw it in sub-area 4, maybe for your parking lot, about where under desired character, it talks about continue the residential character as much as possible. And at the end, complimenting is, it's desirable. That's just so nebulous. That might be something in the future to be a little more concise on, just to, as much as possible. What does that mean? That's all.
But I think that's the intent. The more discussion we had about that was that people really wanted to define what is character and what's the character for each of these areas to be more specific. It doesn't do it at this point. Definitely. It's good. Photographs working for people generally?
Well, it's Littleton at least. Versus Timbuktu.
Yeah.
Sub-area 5, that's the Main Street, the second page. Desired character, second paragraph. New buildings higher than 2 stories should set their upper floors. I don't know that they shall. Do they really have a choice there? I think they have to, don't they?
Can be
Yeah.
shall.
Again, this is desired character. Again, we're trying not to change anything with it at this point.
And I think
I don't
this
know.
is just to give you whatever is out there today. Then when you get into the standard section, I believe there is a standard that says it shall be stepped back. Is that correct?
Right, there is.
That's where we need to get to that level to make sure that happens.
So this is more an
That's what we're
intent.
saying.
Yeah, it's
More than
intent
Big old
statement.
shell. I'm sorry.
This is more of an intent statement, I think. So we kept them kind of general.
Yeah, but if you said, well, that's a pretty important piece of downtown. Like I say,
I could
Make it
argue it, it says should here, why, if it's shall, why don't you say it shall?
Is the commission generally comfortable with changing the language of existing character in other places as well, where we have those shoulds or something else and make it more definitive, more like standards?
well, it's not real picky. If you cover it further in and it turns the shell further in,
Right.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Not the end of the world.
Does there need to, would it be advisable to make some sort of a reference to the historic preservation standards in sub-area 5? I mean, I don't know that it says that well, actually it does say Main Street Historic District.
But does it, we need to reference the other design guidelines.
Yeah, exactly, because I mean, presumably those are gonna take precedent over anything that's in here.
It's on page 16. It's in there.
Opted in.
It's on page 16.
But most of them are.
No.
Well, 66 of them.
Okay.
There it is.
I mean, you're, fair point, not all of them.
It's right there. Yep.
And maybe that's what needs to be said. If you've got a building that's opted in, then you need to look at X.
Yes, it
Right,
says
It doesn't
that.
say that.
It says that on page 16.
16, the last paragraph, it's page 16 at the bottom. It does say that. It does say,
The downtown design standards are for use for non-contributing buildings, and when the historic preservation design standards, and then you refer to the historic design standards.
the one above that says buildings in the historic district identified as contributing to the historic district.
Well, that's
Separate.
existing, yeah, so for existing character for sure, but same thing for desired. I mean, I don't know if it needs to be restated, but obviously the desired character is the historic character at some level. And then, yeah, as long as you've got a link in there that says, go see this,
We could list the title.
Sure.
that
maybe,
might be a good idea.
16, yeah.
I noticed the picture of the Carnegie Library does not have the big red tents in front of it. Older picture.
Older picture, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
They took them down.
Say what?
They took them down. There's awnings there now, the tents are gone.
Other comments?
If the picture were a little bit further east, you could get one of the banners, just across Main Street. Just sort of throwing that out there.
Oh, spelling error on sub-area 8. Existing character.
Oh, yes.
The headline there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just a few of the little minor ones, but that's,
That one stands out, it's in the title.
One person in the public meeting really got on our tails about spelling.
And Coleman spelled incorrectly too, so we have to correct that. Coleman should have an E in it.
What'd you say?
Coleman is spelled incorrectly, it needs an E.
C-O-L-E, yeah.
Well, it also looks like there's an extra line in there,
Yeah, you're right.
because, yeah, company should maybe be up higher. I get real nitty there, but.
That makes sense. That's
Oh,
good.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
the picture.
definitely, good. Anything else on sub-areas?
Great.
What's that?
Let's move forward.
Anything else on sub-areas?
Oh, sorry.
Go into standards.
Checklist,
Checklist, what did you think?
master checklist, any comments?
Just one comment about when you start with a section, I'll just say, like on page 22, when you start with 2.0 architecture, it carries over to the next page. When you flip over, it might be nice to have that subtitling 2.0 architecture above there, just to keep, so that when you flip to a different page, it doesn't exist anymore.
Gotcha. Okay,
Just
good.
as a reference point. That happens throughout this a couple of times, when you start on one page and you flip to the next.
And put a continued by it or something.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
to me, that's always helpful. It's the same thing on page 26 with signs,
Yeah.
just to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
it easier for someone to not have to flip back and forth.
Well, that's good, but yeah, we have a lot of pages that do that.
Dennis is the, I'm sorry, were you?
No, I'm done.
Okay. The left-hand column colors, is there, you break them up nicely, you got urban design and architecture, then landscape, so forth and so on, are all different colors. Is there a key or a code or a significance to the, the ones up at the top are.
Yeah, the top of the page, actually for each of those sections, so each of those colors relates to a specific section. For example, starting off,
Gotcha.
with the first one, you have urban design, it's that light blue, and then you go to that section, it's going to be that light blue on the top.
Okay, I'm with you.
We were trying to say, if you're looking for something, you're flipping through, it's got an easy way to find.
No, I think it's,
At least
I think
that
it's,
section.
yeah, I think it's really useful. Yeah, all the color coding makes a big difference. I just hadn't connected those dots, but
Okay.
good.
Okay, anything else on the master list, master checklist? We'll move on to urban design site planning 1.0. And we've got the checklist for this section, so each section has its own checklist.
Let's see, 1.1, building and use orientation, under the objectives. Midway, it's on page 29, you call out the historic entry, you call out on the west end. Now in the description of the areas up above, you talked about the east end. It'd be nice to make another reference to the east end, Rio Grande and Main Street as another entry point. That, to me, is just as important as the opposite end.
Good.
Not quite, but pretty close. Now, you mentioned before, but reiterated here in the historic, sort of the historic entries with an S.
Okay. Good.
I think the focal point, I think we had a few more options there too, because now we only have one.
Right.
I think there were a few more.
There were a few more, yeah, we could add those.
Add those.
Because it should be, focal point should include the courthouse, should include the library.
That can be.
Right, yeah. And I don't know why we reduced that. There was some discussion about that. Okay. Other thing
Anything else on that?
urban design?
One thing that I mentioned last time, this isn't specific to urban design, but we were talking about the color coding. And I don't know if you can get printing flush with the edge, but the color coding at the vertical edge might be helpful to see the different sections better if it's printed out. If it's not printed out, if it's only online.
It's early asked.
You look at it here.
Yeah, but that's
It's a full bleed.
Oh, yeah, and I've seen that before, on other documents where, they'll have it almost like tabs, but they don't stick out. It's just, each section has a color, and it kind of goes down, and then in vertical text, it'll say what section it is. I don't know if it's not necessary, but it's just a nice feature.
It is a nice feature.
You might also have just a page with a key that, just at the front end of the thing,
Okay.
indicate what color is which, just, that way.
Like in the checklist here? Or you want something more compact?
Yeah, maybe just one page before, like, urban design site planning, maybe a
Perhaps on the
page,
table of contents where we go through?
something like that, yeah, just an insert a page, it's got the colors that say, this color means landscape, this color means whatever, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, you can put something here on the table of contents on the side that shows all the colors vertically, and if it matched the colors down the road, if you were able to do that. Because you can kind of see that off the edge if it gets flush. If it's not flush, it's not as useful, but anyway, just a thought.
Okay, good.
I had just one thought on, it's on page 30 under general standards. 125 and 128, this is probably more for a future, where it talks about in the residential, at least some of the residential entrances, they both say that. At some point, it might help to have more of a definition of what at least some means. Just for the future discussion on it, not for this one, but for the future. Add to your parking lot.
We've had a lot of discussion about that in terms of what it means and kind of come around trying to define different terms. And again, trying to stick with what was in the original document in terms of what their intent was. And so we do think it's a later phase, you're absolutely right, probably.
I agree.
So, good.
Same page 30, 1.2.7.
Okay.
For any buildings with residential units, primary residential entrances from a parking lot are prohibited. Secondary entrances may be considered, like these the slot development with 6 units or whatever on Curtis. I mean, obviously the front 2 units facing the street have direct entries, but it seems, is this referring to bigger buildings where you're definitely going to come in from a rear parking lot into your?
Well, it's even talking about, I think, that some of the existing buildings have been built, that if the only door into those units was off, next to the garage, that would not be consistent with that. So they wanted something which actually was a front door, had a sidewalk attaching and felt like that, rather than having to walk through, and the parking lot, basically.
I think that could apply to, big complexes as well as, 8, 9, 10 unit.
When we think about Littleton mixed use was the other one.
Sorry?
When we thought about Littleton mixed use, we had the same thought. There is a secondary entrance to those residential units from the parking, but the
Well, there
primary
is no
entrance is off of Main
residential
Street.
in
Right.
mixed use.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
When there was.
So at that point, visitors, they're not gonna wander around the alley or.
Right, exactly.
They can go in the front door.
Right. That's true.
I understand.
And Main Street apartments have that even, so they've got the secondary access, but they have the primary access off of Prince.
And, you got any more on 30?
No,
31, 1.3.3, sort of the same issue. Parking lots may remain but shall not be extended or expanded. Additional screening of the parking lot at the edge of the street may be required. So, what does that mean?
It just means if you have an existing building that you need some renovation, and you happen to have an existing parking lot, as part of that renovation, we may require you to add additional screening and landscaping to it.
Well, does screening mean landscaping? Or does it mean like a
Landscaping
fence?
can be used to do that, yes.
Do you want to say screening or landscaping?
Well, we've got screening defined.
It's in the landscape section.
Oh, I missed that.
It's not in here, but
It's not
yes.
here, but we might add it, yeah, so.
Okay. I guess I just.
It is in the definitions on
Yeah, sure.
page
Law 3. Yeah,
76.
Okay.
And you can use landscaping and other architectural screening.
I think up above it said may be considered was one of your terms of use kind of thing.
Yes.
Is that, is it maybe required, is that different? That's obviously maybe considered.
Well, maybe considered as a way to meet the standard.
Yeah.
So we're saying, here's the standard, and then here's one way you might meet that standard, that there are different ways to do it, so.
Then do you want to say here may be considered? Because required is a higher standard.
Right.
Or do you want to add may be required to your list of definitions?
Yeah, right, yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily care one way or the other, it just
Yeah.
opens it up to confusion, I think.
Okay,
We can ask,
yeah.
but the consultants kind of kept track of all the changes in the
Yeah.
process of how we've gotten there, so
Sure.
that was just an oversight, and it should say shall instead of may, because it
Yeah.
used to be a guideline.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
No, right,
we
there's a lot
spotted
of
ones every meeting.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Urban design, site plan? Hi. Continue.
Anything else? Not going to move on to architecture 2.0? So we've got we have the checklist.
Just the same thing when you're in the middle of the checklist, like here. I'm looking at page 37. The very bottom, you start going into building and lighting, and then you flip the page. It might be nice just to have the building and lighting subtitled again.
Right. Good. Okay.
This might be considered more of a future thing too, but next page, 2.1, objectives to preserve the existing character. Again, very nebulous, what's existing character mean? That might be something in the future to get a little more descriptive of.
Right, absolutely. And we have revised that description a little bit, but not detailed enough to
Yeah, just-
really get into if you're, what's the roof supposed to look like? What is the character in this case?
Yeah. If you're supposed to do the existing character, it's really helpful to know what does that mean.
Right. Yep.
Page 40. Examples of traditional design principles include the end of the second one. Apparent floor heights or setback using other materials or combing strategies. Old people use combing strategies, but I assume this is combining strategies here.
Leave it in there. See
I
if
got
you
a big kick out of that one. I really wish I'd changed that before it went to anybody else. Actually, all in all, I'm really happy with the architectural section. We spent a lot of time on this section.
Yeah, the illustrations are really helpful too.
Good.
Yeah, nice job.
They did, and they added the second drawing.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. On page, was it 41? Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
anything else?
anything else in that section? These were our biggest, our largest sections, took the most time.
I was just looking on page 46 again. I think this is more towards the future. Under sub-area specific standards, 2.26 and a great majority of the facades. Just again, something in the future to consider. What does that mean?
There's a
We
definition.
did define that.
Oh, my goodness.
There's a
Yep.
definition in the back.
Now that I wouldn't realize. Okay.
Yeah, I know, see, that exactly,
That's
that's what we meant. There's a few that it's just, how would you ever know to look in the back? But
So
it's
there's
basically
a-
more than,
Yeah.
an amount
65%.
no less than 65%.
Yeah, and we were looking for.
And that's in the back, you mean in the glossary?
Glossary, yes,
Yeah.
glossary,
Oh,
yeah, sorry, yeah.
That's great,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't have guessed that.
It's under,
Yeah,
great
right.
majority, and we had
No.
the same question exactly.
I would have guessed a great majority would be defined.
Exactly.
So that is very appreciative.
And we were looking for what's the number, because we wanted to be as specific as possible, and so we found some comparables that were 65, and so we were going with that. Think that through.
Well, if great majority is in here, then you should definitely have some in here too.
Yeah, hey, probably should.
Definition of zone.
Just to know, ask.
What's the basic ignorance question? What's the N versus R referring to?
Oh,
New versus replacement or something?
replacement, revised, yeah.
Renovation, okay. Yeah, okay. I didn't.
So those will go away, yeah, when we finalize this.
Do you say that, is that in the glossary as well, somewhere?
No, we need to add that, I don't think we do have it in there.
Which one?
But N versus R.
You're gonna get rid of those?
We will, I think, when it's adopted, I don't think we need that after it's adopted, but for this purpose, it's kind of nice
It's
to
about
have,
the
so we know
language.
what was there, what wasn't, it's changed.
Whether it's new or revised.
New or revised.
Okay, but I mean, if
I thought we put it in the front probably, but we could put it in the glossary. I thought we put it in the front, in the description of how to use it.
It says applying to new construction or applying to rehabilitation.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's what it means.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Because I mean, the numbering convention would have to, so you are gonna just leave it in there, are you?
Yes,
And it-
yeah.
Yeah,
Let's
okay,
take
okay,
it.
okay, good. That makes sense.
Okay, we're still on architecture. Anything else in that section? Landscape architecture.
I had some comments.
Oh, good.
Of course, 20 minutes go by.
And I went over them with the open house last week, and I sent you this morning, Dennis, red lines.
Yes, right.
But anyway, there was some things, like obviously on page 56, which is the first page, I was asking, is there anything to be filled into that column as far as links? And it sounds like that's going to be filled in.
Right, yeah, sure will.
I mean, but it would just be a link, so that rest of
Right.
the column would be blank. Are you saying
Right.
the rest of the, is there more to get filled in?
I thought there was more that was going to go.
That, a link is not gonna create filling for the rest of
Full little
that.
thing, no.
So it's
the
just,
manual.
it's
Just the
just
manual
linking to
itself.
the manual.
Right,
Yeah.
and not the individual sections of the manual. If we have some of those, they'll be in the text itself, but to a specific section.
Be nice maybe to include 2 or 3 pictures, maybe of some combination landscape,
Good.
metal fencing and
Sure.
and brick columns, several
Good.
projects around here have those.
Good.
Some nice examples of landscaping around a parking lot.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and I had a comment that there's a lot of, white space on the edges that they could include some diagrams like they had for the architecture.
Right, good.
The one that shows the parking lot on page 57 is good. That type of illustrative, simple diagram. I had a comment that some of the widths that are shown, like 20-foot wide landscape zone, seemed wide to me in a downtown urban context. But I think the intent was to document what we have now, right?
Right.
So in the parking lot, I think we should look at those in the future.
Yeah, we do.
We do too, and the other thing we need to look at, because this is connected to it, is the landscape manual. That hasn't been updated since 1978. So we definitely have that on the list of something.
Russian olives are allowed.
They are.
Yeah, they're still on there.
That
So we're
needs to be
actually
encouraged, actually. Because that will also have an impact as well.
There was one thing also too with the city's sort of sustainability, resiliency intention. I think there's an opportunity to get more about that in here. And I mentioned the idea of, we have a paving section toward the back here, and why not encourage or at least allow pervious pavement systems that reduce runoff. LID, low impact development, green infrastructure type of site, I think would be good, especially downtown.
Definitely
Which
phase
page were you
two.
at?
Good idea.
Well, I had it toward the end where we get into pavements and and site amenities and that type of thing. It was more of a general comment because nothing about the stormwater.
The recessed islands where it's sort of like a garden almost.
Right, yeah, there's a lot of creative things happening now in sort of urban design. Let's see, and, specifically on the screening of parking areas. You see, this is,
Okay.
it's page 58. Right above 3.3 screening walls and fencing, carries over from the previous page. We have, let's see, solid masonry wall at least 3'6" high for screening. There's no maximum height on it. So it could be a 10-foot high wall to screen your cars. And I think even 3'6" is pretty high for a wall. I think 3'6" should probably be the maximum height.
Okay, right.
It's really just to screen the bumper and the headlights, right?
Right.
So,
That might have come out of the fence code for
Yes.
front yards.
Right, yep.
and then under screening walls and fencing, we talked to the architect about this a little bit too, is it could be widened to include railings and walls. Well, it says walls, but it really talks about fencing in here. And it talks about transparency, percent transparency on front yard fencing and that type of thing. Again, I think some, maybe some diagrams or some photos and images would be helpful there. With site amenities, I didn't see much on there. They say trash receptacles and loading docks, but that's just about screening. There's really nothing about benches or bike racks or other types of site amenities that you might have associated with on private land. And I think the whole thing is establishing this public realm that's not only within the right-of-way but extends into the private property. I think there were some good things said about pavements, where pavement should be extended to the face of the building regardless of what the setback is in certain contexts. So that's good, but I think there should also be an encouragement of creating outdoor spaces for people. And let's talk about outdoor dining.
We need to be more specific with what we're trying to accomplish, I think.
Right. Let's see. Those were the major comments.
along those same lines, this may be just out of scope, and it's a bigger issue than just this. Do we talk about lighting anywhere in here? I didn't really see. There was sign illumination that they talked about, I saw.
Right.
I'm glad you brought that up, David. That was another comment.
But there's this whole thing about, and I don't think we have this anywhere in Littleton, this whole dark sky initiative where lights are supposed to point down. You're not supposed to use.
Used to.
You're not supposed to use the blue LED. I don't know what you call it.
Yeah.
It's a bug
That
rating
color.
for.
Page 59.
cutoffs.
Talks about the standard.
Yeah. Yeah. Site lighting, shielding, this kind of stuff. Yeah.
But since you brought up kind of,
Yeah, because there is a lighting piece to
oh yeah,
this.
here, site lighting and parking lot.
And that, I thought, in downtown areas, you have like the Tivoli or the market lighting, there's different types of things that signify that you're in a downtown area and allow and support, more active outdoor uses at night, even accent lighting on the trees and that type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it talks a little bit about, I mean, it just mentions light pollution, but that whole dark sky initiative, I think, sets standards for how lighting should be, pointed and beneficial for people in general. I don't know if that just means changing chapter 15 lighting requirements, right?
Yeah, and it's strange it's under where it is.
Yeah, landscape. Lighting was mentioned earlier under architecture as well.
That could be.
It's a good next phase discussion. It's great. It's on the list. Perfect.
Yeah.
Rather than the stepchild of other sections, it has its,
Yeah,
Could have its
right.
own.
the lighting engineer would really have a problem.
Yeah,
with
right?
this.
Too bad we don't have one of those on there.
Good.
Well, we can
I
assign,
gotta read up on that.
do assignments. You're now the lighting expert, since
Yeah,
you,
I'm the lighting engineer.
so study up.
Craig, was that your comment, or did you have something else?
I did make a specific comment about the
Oh,
lighting.
yeah.
Other comments on?
Just a very minor one compared to all these. On page 55, first chapter under 3.0, it has chapter 15 and title 10 of the municipal code. Should that be in red? Because when you look in farther sections in here, just flipping the pages, they've got, when you go back to the code, in red. So I was just wondering if that be in red.
Is that actually a link in the other sections where you can click on it?
This is meant to be an electronic
be, yeah.
document, so
Yeah.
there are 5 links in it.
Which is great.
Anything else? Shall we move on to signs?
Yeah, who's the sign expert here?
Sign engineer. Sign engineer.
Pretty much. Unlikely.
Okay.
Okay, we'll have to make a change to the reference. It's the wrong reference now to the sign code. It's
Right.
now in Title 10.
It's like Title 10, exactly.
I guess on 4.1.2, the 64, I assume this is all in the code, the 10% window area, the 20%.
Right.
That's all just pretty much referencing stuff that's already in the code.
Oh, yeah.
It's not Chapter 3 anymore, so we should
Right. Change that
do
as
the
well.
new reference.
Good.
So I'm not clear on what, looking at page 65 under general standards, size and height of the sign. What's that mean? Maximum sign size or total sign area shall not be increased by the amount of setback provided. Try to understand what that means. Like that means if you move the building back 2 feet, the sign would get 2 feet wider or bigger, taller? Is it 2 square foot bigger? I don't know.
We questioned that ourselves. So we kind of left it because we couldn't figure out what to change, I think.
So So that was
It's
carried over.
at the bottom, 4.31.
I'd interpret that.
Some sign codes allow you to have bigger sign areas as you set back farther.
But it wouldn't be directly related even to the setback.
Right.
See if we can figure that out. Relation to
Yeah.
the amount of setback or something like that.
Try and clarify that.
This is some,
Well, either way, you
some
can't
developer
increase the-
tried to use that as an argument, and that was a direct response.
That's an attorney
I mean, I think it's saying you can't increase the maximum size of the sign,
Yeah.
period, that's how I read it.
Yeah.
Just to lower on that page, curious about 4.2.2, signs shall not be located on the residential portion of the facade of a mixed-use building, although if, the lofts on Prince Street, it's legitimate to have that on the residential building entrance.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's the point.
Clarify.
Yeah.
You can sneak that in before, nobody will notice, just clarify.
That'd be
That's a good point.
So is
changing, that's a good phase two.
Yeah.
4.7.4 talks about the design of a joint identification sign. Does that have something to do with a marijuana dispensary?
What page you just-
Good. 69. Just curious.
Good question.
Where's it?
4.7.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this just comes from Denver.
Moving back to 67, I appreciate 4.5.8 prohibiting just the, standard sign cabinets. Don't know if that's a carryover from the old
It is,
standards,
yeah.
but it's a good standard.
I had a question on page 69, under 4.610 and 11. It talks about projecting signs shall be encouraged, and the other one also talks about encouraged. What are we looking for when we say encouraged? I mean, yeah, we want them to do it, but if they don't want to do it, they don't have to do it. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So is that something that needs to be looked at in the future to be more definitive
I think
if we
so.
truly want that?
Right.
I'm just asking.
Yes, definitely. That's phase two.
But encouraged in the glossary.
Yeah, I was just checking to see.
I should have looked there first.
Alas, it's not there.
Strongly encouraged.
Mother may I too, Double the.
Now, projecting signs, when I first looked at that, you know how there's the projected images that they put on buildings now? That's a whole new thing. Is there anything in here
Not
that?
nothing, I don't think, yeah, but I can think that.
I was thinking a projection image, what do they call that? There's a name for it.
Projection. Sign code generally.
Technical expression, yes.
There's a place for you in the fine arts board.
What's pornography, y'all know when it's the
I don't know if that's in the lighting code or not. There might be something in the lighting.
It's kind of a new technology.
No, they've certainly improved it. Yeah, it's a fair point.
Okay, I got that.
Good. Anything in the definitions?
Just one thing.
Okay.
Obviously, I didn't read them all close enough because I didn't see the great majority one. On page 75, under objectives, it talks about the applicability of a standard or guideline. I'm just thinking, do we want the guideline still there?
Oh, yeah, we don't really need that.
Yeah.
What page you on, I'm sorry?
75,
75.
objectives.
Objectives?
It's
Yeah.
Oh, right.
second from the bottom line.
Thank you. Yeah, we're trying to get rid of all those references.
Yeah, it's in there twice.
Okay. Yep.
page 71 with the photo of the example of the awning sign, and then on the following page, text on an awning sign shall not be greater than 8 inches high. My hope is that the picture of the awning sign has text meeting that standard. Because it's a good example of an awning sign, and if it's not meeting our 8-inch standard, then 8 inches.
I think it does for the text, right? It
Yeah,
doesn't
not
for
sure.
the graphic next door.
Yeah, as
It's a good
awning
question.
signs go, it's very restrained.
We can ask Pam, because
I have a question. It might not be in here, it might not be related to this, but it just came up on a project that we're working on. What guidelines are there for address text for building? And I imagine it's set by emergency, fire, police, find the address, as far as maximum size lettering. A project where the city's requiring 6-inch letters in a graphic area where we don't want to have, they just clutter it up, they take away everything.
Well, I think we do, and not in the city code, we manage that whole annexing piece. I believe there's letters in there, in sizes, or excuse me,
Be
sizes.
in the sign.
not the sign.
I don't think, it's not, in the sign code, remember with all the rules and regulations nowadays, we can't really manage the content of what's stated, so I think it'd be hard to give a size of, the letters that could be on the sign. Since we can't manage what it says anymore. But that's a good question to just verify, or maybe a phase 2 if there's any addressing letter, excuse me, addressing numbers.
Anything else?
Any general comments at the end here? It seems like we had some minor adjustments and questions, but the intent still stands.
That's great.
I think it's really good work on the team's part.
Yeah, the consultants have done a great job, and the tech team has done a great job, so we really appreciate it.
Thanks for your hard work.
Yes.
Your 4 to 6 meetings.
Our consultant, again, 2 times in a row, we have good consultants. So,
That's wonderful.
good. Any other last comments?
That's great.
Okay.
We'll see this again on July 9th.
I'm sorry, July.
July 9th.
Are we going to be seeing you on July?
No. Possibly. And hopefully a new me will be here.
We could mention that we're
Can't
having
be
a
replaced,
tech
sorry.
meeting on Friday from 3 to 5, and then adjourning to
Yes.
a local watering hole.
Afterwards.
We won't give them any free publicity, but if you'd like to join us, ask me or whatever, and our tech committee and any of you are, I'm sure, welcome. No, Dennis is paying for everything. Or the joke will get me in trouble. The Planning Commission slush fund. Okay. Yes.
Personally.
Okay, Jocelyn, anything else to add? Any upcoming events, et cetera? Any general news?
One general news on the Vision project. Excitingly, we have Ken Keast here today, yesterday, tomorrow. And they are doing some of the listening sessions, getting started underway with the visioning process and project. And we have hired someone to help us because with Dennis leaving here soon, it's been difficult to fill that position, so we hired someone to help us in the interim project manage that, so that's great. So we're getting that started. And one thing, we will be reaching out to Planning Commission to give you the general layout of the timeline, but also we want to solicit your participation in this project. So I'll be sending you an email, and we, at the last meet and greet, we handed out a flyer to the community to say, hey, watch for more information of how to participate. We'll have, the ability to apply, or provide input online. We're going to try to go to some outreach, the meet and greets and some other community events to get people to participate that way. And then we also are setting up kind of listening room sessions, and that's what the consultants have been working on mostly this trip. So I'll be reaching out to you to see if you have any interest in helping us coordinate some version of one of those type of style meetings as members of the Planning Commission. So just more to come, but it's exciting that we're getting that started. So,
Very good.
that's the main update. Yeah.
So, will be our big thrust here in the next 2 years, comprehensive plan.
Yes, yep, and so vision is really, this summer is where we want to do the main, so June through August, to capture that input.
Is council okay with the comp plan part with them too? Or I thought that was
No,
in.
we'll have to come back to council probably during budget for next year, because comp plan will probably begin, beginning of next year, so it'll be within that budget process for the scope and the allocate money for that as well. So, but using the same consultants, that's the idea, Connect East.
Hopefully we can just go from one to the next and keep moving on this.
Absolutely, that's the idea.
Not stall out.
It's a pretty short timeline, end of 2019, to get it all done. It's exciting, but that's all.
Very good. Thank you all.